Hello, everybody. So, my name is Joël Brierre, and I just wanted to welcome everybody to a fun little conversation with some interesting people. Without a long introduction, I'm just going to open it up, and I'll just go in order of who I've got up here right now. So, Mr. Tom, would you introduce yourself?
Hi all, my name is Tom Hatsis, saying hello from Portland, Oregon.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Rak.
Hello, I'm Rak Razam, currently in San Francisco. I believe this is 2020, yeah? This is the first year of quarantine. This is what happens in this time frame. Here we are. Welcome. Hi.
Ms. Natalie.
Hey, I'm Natalie from London.
So today we're just going to be speaking about psychedelic use and how psychedelic use can help prepare people for challenging experiences. Obviously, we're in a bit of a challenging experience. These are turbulent times for the entire world at the same time. We're all going through something right now. And I can only look back at my past experiences and see how my work with psychedelics and psychedelic integration in combination with other modalities has helped prepare me for challenging situations. So I just wanted to open up to other people who are working with medicines around the world and see how they feel. Let's go in the same order. I'm going to mute myself.
Hi, cool. Well, thanks again, everyone, for being out there listening. Thank you, Joel, for putting this together. Rak and Natalie for being a part of it as well. This is really cool. So it's a weird question for me because I've never actually had a challenging psychedelic experience ever in my life. I have been kind of a Gaia worshiper for many years, like even before I started dabbling with mushrooms, which is my main medicine that I work with. So when I show up into that space, I've always actually been pretty, received a very warm welcome. And so it's actually a little interesting for me because the challenge is that trying to, how can I put this? The challenge is trying to explain it. The challenge is trying to fall into this experience, this coronavirus experience, while still having, I'm a hopeless optimistic person. I'm a hopeless optimist, and I'm one of those people that, despite there are some people that are losing family members, which is horrible. This is, I think there was a meme that said we're all being sent to our room collectively by Gaia. Maybe I'm crazy, but I fall in line with that, and I don't know, I'm like the worst person to answer this question because I never had a bad experience with psychedelics. Like, I don't know what a bad experience with psychedelics is. It's always been a warm reception. So I had planned to eat some mushrooms, a nice high dose, and try to communicate with the virus. But then I was just like, you know what, maybe not. I don't know if that's even the right thing to do. And I don't know, who knows? I suck at this. I'm done answering that question. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. How about you, Rak?
All right. Well, it's a big open-ended question, and I mean, there's a lot of different layers to it. So number one, people need to have an understanding of many things. Psychedelics, so what is a psychedelic and what is an entheogen? What is the role of ceremony? What is the role of going through these type of initiations, because they are initiations. So to give some context, even to tap into what Tom was saying, this whole idea of Gaia, of the planet, of Mother Earth, who secretes these substances, these psychoactive substances, not just for humans, animals take them too. There's been YouTube videos you can see on the BBC of jaguars in the jungle of Peru gnawing on an ayahuasca vine. There's been different studies and reports. But essentially, these substances are natural. Even if they're made in a lab and they've got a purity, they still are affecting our consciousness. But it's, for me, the idea of an entheogen or a medicine is with the set and setting it's used in. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with recreation, but there's also this idea in tribal cultures who have been caretakers of these medicines and of the connection they can bestow to yourself and to your tribe and to the planet and to feeling connection. They're really all about connection. There's been some really beautiful studies done in the last few years. One of them is by Sam Gandhi and others at Imperial College in the UK, looking at the ecodelic propensities of these substances to reconnect us to nature. So, you know, if you're doing a psychedelic like LSD in the city, that's all good and well. If you're doing ayahuasca in the jungle, that's all good and well. The set and setting, which is an old Tim Leary phrase, is really important to your internal set, which can affect you having a good or bad experience, but also the setting that you're in. And we know that these substances from these studies have been saying that there is a likelihood that it can help us feel open, it can help us feel connected to nature, to understand some of the organic mechanisms of nature and how we fit into that, our place in the web of life. And this isn't necessarily a mental thing. It's an emotional thing. It's an intuition. It's a process which is calling us back into the heart and back into feeling our emotions. And this is where difficult and challenging experiences can arise. It's in the feeling. I mean, if the mind is out of control, that's one thing. But there's also this ability to feel deeply and to feel all the buried, suppressed emotions or things that we pushed away in the hustle and bustle of the rat race. And as you say now, this is a great time. There's so many different metaphors of the great pause or the reset, or this time between world ages. You know, basically everything that we've been coasting on, it looks like things are going to get back to normal, but it's not going to be normal because there is no normal. It's all been a cultural appropriation, an agreement that we all play by these rules of the game, and the rules of the game have changed. We're going to get over the coronavirus eventually. The economic collapse that is coming is necessary because capitalism is embedded as a system within nature, and nature is what these substances connect us back to. They are potentially ego dissolving, and when they dissolve that, they can return us to that sense of oneness, that sense of going home, to feeling connected to something larger. So in a nutshell, and we can drill down into details and riff off this to different degrees, but in a nutshell, you know, the indigenous people that have been caretakers of plant and earth medicines, and this bridge that's been built in the last few generations in the West with shamanism particularly, and the idea of ceremonies. So it's not just that you're taking something randomly in your backyard, it's that you're hosted and you're going through this initiation with support in a ceremony. And so, you know, I really see the same dynamics that are happening in the world at the moment as a planetary ceremony. That, you know, the coronavirus is essentially the entheogen we didn't ask for, in the sense that it has the potential to break down all the old and to make us, force us in a way to look within and to come together. And so it can awaken that divine space we all have within ourselves. But we are very much in the dynamics of a planetary ceremony. And to use an ayahuasca metaphor, we're only at the first cup. It's going to be a long night. Yeah.
Thank you, Rak. Thank you, Rak. Ms. Natalie, what is your take?
Well, I can say that I've had some wild experiences, and which I've asked for to do my healing. So it's given me, the medicine's always given me exactly what I've asked for and needed. But in terms of preparing for times like this, it's definitely helped me prepare to surrender to the process and to be present in the now. And just like that night of ayahuasca that you think that it's never going to end, you know, it will end in the way it's supposed to end. So it's really helped me kind of just to surrender to the now and to just stay in that kind of present moment. And I see it as a beautiful time that we're all retreating into our own homes, into our own houses in our heads, and a mass healing for everyone, whether they understand it or not. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, thank you. So yeah, you know, my psychedelic career, if you will, started off in the. Can you guys see my face over here? Yeah, okay. I'm just looking at Natalie. I don't know how to use Zoom yet. So, you know, my entheogenic or psychedelic career, when it first started, of course, it was recreational. I remember having some, unlike you, Tom, I had some awful trips when I first started out. And one of the things that it did help instill was this too shall pass. It I helped understood that no matter how crazy things seemed, that kind of just breathing through it, you can just breathe through it. And then, of course, fast forward a long time until later years and much more responsible use, especially with 5-MeO or Toad, you know, reaching those deeper spaces as you start to feel things falling away. There's that panic of the mind. As you start to go so far from yourself so quickly that the mind starts to reel in terror and try and hold on. And you learn to start letting that go. And so just as when this started and all of a sudden work stopped happening and, you know, sources of income ceased and things started just closing up everywhere, of course, it was natural for my mind to begin to recoil in terror and to think, oh my goodness. And it was amazing to be able to watch, though, from an observer's point of view, and watch how my mind was attempting to reach out and grab onto the things that were falling away, even though some of them were things that I've resented for so long and things and systems that I've known are due to fall away. But it's just the mind's natural tendency to try and hold on, to try and reach for things that are falling away because it's familiar and because we're afraid of what's on the other side of that. We're afraid of what's on the other side of the unknown. And so I noticed that initial urge from my mind to try and panic and hold on. And once I immediately was able to, not immediately, but once I was able to begin letting that go, and it was the exact same process as I would in a medicine experience, especially if I've experienced, just slowly surrendering and then noticing, you know, when a little bit of my awareness would hold on to one little bit and just continually letting it go. And almost as if we are going through one big full release, things are falling away. You know, at least some systems will not be the same anymore after this. Things will be changed. And it's almost a reboot of sorts, you know, like we said, you know, we've been sent to our rooms, like Tom said, we've been sent to our rooms for a while, and we all get to just come in here and just gather ourselves. We get to collect ourselves. We get to go within and say, look at ourselves and look at the world. We're getting an individual look at ourselves, and we're getting a meta look at the way things are working, and seeing, you know, okay, we get this chance to look at ourselves and be like, okay, these things within me aren't working anymore. They are causing turbulence in my relations with those around me. So we get to really engage in deep self-inquiry, while at the same time, we, as not just one country or society, but as the entire world, get to kind of collectively take a look at things and be like, you know, some of this shit just wasn't working how it should have been. And hopefully some things will be reassessed. Hopefully we can take this as some sort of reboot, and as if the world is in a state of neuroplasticity for a while, and we can begin to pick it all apart and put something together that works. But who knows? Yes, brother Tom.
Okay.
Oops, shit, I just muted you.
Am I back? Yes, there it is. Okay, cool. One thing that I wanted to say that I've been thinking about, as far as like, we talk about like, are we going to go back to what was, you know, normal, or as Rak said, like what is really normal? So let's just call it the status quo. And one of the things that I actually fear, and this happens in history, is there's a state of what's called anome. Anime is, you know, I don't mean like anime cartoons. It's a different word. And what it means is normallessness. Like what we're all experiencing anime right now. Now, one of the problems with anime is that because things are so unlike how they were, there's almost this pull to jump back to how they were just to make things normal again. We need to see this, and I'm going to piggyback off Rak's ayahuasca metaphor. I'm seeing this as almost like an ibogaine treatment, like an ibogaine flood dose. It's up to us after the dose to not go back to those old habits. Like the ibogaine will reset you, but it's not going to cure you or anything. Like if you take ibogaine, let's say that you were a heroin addict, and then you take the ibogaine and it just releases you from that addiction. It's now up to you to not go back to heroin. It's not going to stop you from going to it. It's up to you to stop yourself. This coronavirus is the same thing. We can't go back to how things were, and I don't want us to be so eager for our lives that we go back to the nonsense that we were dealing with before. I just wanted to get that out.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I was saying before the call, I feel personally in myself this sense of grieving, and it's basically because, you know, because of a lot of these changes and things that's been happening on the cultural level, I'm leaving this country and going back to Australia. And so there's a lot of physical saying goodbyes. There's a lot of letting goes, and there's a lot of resistance as well. And I see that, to echo what Tom said, that, you know, everyone wants to be able to go outside again. They want to be able to connect with humans again. We want to be able to be whole again and not, you know, suppressed and locked in and held back. But this is sort of like the build. It's like this is the build up to, use that ayahuasca metaphor again, the purge. You know, you feel it rumbling, you feel this constriction, you feel this thing you just really want to release. And then when it does, it just doesn't stop, right? But the thing is, the powers that be are going to want to try to reinstate the status quo and basically the capitalist battery farm of consciousness that we've got. And I don't think a lot of us really want that. I think this great pause and this swing between the pendulum of this time between worlds, in a sense, is giving us this ability to be introspective and to look about what's really important. And yet we still there's a lot of work to be done. And it's basically the beginning. This is like 2020 is like year zero. And, you know, this metaphor we're using of the medicine journey, you know, it's like, what is medicine? It's like, we're all medicine. I mean, I feel like for generations, Westerners have been taking plant medicines and healing. I mean, a lot of that's been about purging and releasing and letting go and clearing out the vessel. But at the heart of it, they pretty much always say to me, it's like, you are the medicine. You have it within you. You have this divine source. You can access this without taking the external thing, but you're just so sick. So the planetary culture, whether it's into psychedelics or plant medicines, it doesn't really matter. We're in this human experience together. And not just the metaphors, but the control mechanisms, you know, the story that has been told of who and what we really are and what we're embedded in is just disintegrating. And the powers that be are throwing trillions of dollars at the capitalist story, and it's sinking. It's not going to actually go back to the way, which is a great thing. And yet it's like everyone has to do their own individual letting go. We have to do our mourning and grieving of what was. And I even find myself, it's like I'm compartmentalizing, and I'm like, okay, so 8 things have disappeared, but I'll hold on to those last 2 things. It's like you feel, you know, on the verge of being lost. It's like, who and what defines us, you know, our work and our communities and our sense of being. When everything starts to fall away, this is why they're worried about the wave of suicides and the part of the economic collapse. And then the corona is a trigger. You know, you could almost say that like LSD is like 250 micrograms. It's so small, you know, to have such an effect. The corona is large; it's having a deadly effect all around the world. But it's, you know, it's affecting a lot of people that aren't even getting the virus. But the cultural effect, you know, is going to be huger, and it's a transformative time. It's like it is medicine, and it is, and not the corona, but the culture. Like human beings are in a medicine transformation stage, and regardless of the fact that the mainstream mightn't understand that, I think it puts more impetuous and more responsibility on people who do understand it and have had these experiences and may continue to have these experiences, to continue to work on themselves and to continue to foster their communities to hold space for the collective.
Yes. Yes, indeed. You know, it's something that you touched on there with the grieving, I think is very, very important. And I think a lot of people are really going to breeze by that part. And, you know, especially with the masculine side of us, when there seems to be something wrong or off, if we're feeling sad or grieving something, we naturally tend to want to fix it immediately or look at ways why we don't need to be grieving it or why it's going to be okay. Except grieving in itself is a natural process and it's a healthy process. And in grieving is introspection. And it allows us to go in and understand what qualities that what we are grieving over, what qualities that it brought to our life, what we learned from it, what medicine it came, you know, what medicine came in it, and also what we're learning from it coming out of our lives, whether temporarily or permanently. And grieving is such deep introspective medicine. It's something that I've been, you know, never really understood a lot about. It was something that I could kind of think about, but you know, Mary, my wife, is as a death doula, end of life coach. She's also a grief coach, and that's something she's really helped me understand. Is the process of grieving is it can be good stuff. It can be very powerful medicine.
You know what someone's described to me, that grief is actually unexpressed love. It's all that stuff we bottle up, and all the wanting, all the desire, all the what ifs, all the should have beens, could have beens, all that imagined pathway that you could have lived, but it's gone or it's not attainable, but it's still, you still feel it. It's still within you. You still have connection and that feeling. It's just not being able to express. And that's like the story of the world, man. It's like we're all grieving, and it's like, but we're still coasting that everything's going to be back to normal. And we don't want it, not everyone wants it to be normal. We want it to be equitable and fair. We want a new story, and we want like a new love story, you know, to arise from the ashes of the old. But I think you're right. We can't spiritual bypass this. We need to go deeply within ourselves and to grieve and to feel where that's coming from and what that means to us individually and collectively.
So,
Natalie,
ooh,
you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I feel like it's like the Tower card in the tarot, that everything has to come crashing down to be real built up. And eventually, at this moment in time, I don't feel like everything has completely come crashing down for people to have that effect on the masses to completely change things. So we are at the beginning of this, and it's a true blessing. I always say that there's so many dynasties that have come before us, come and gone before us, and what makes us think that we're more superior than them, or even more superior than Mother Nature, the Earth. So yeah.
it is very exciting. It is extremely exciting. It's, yeah, you can feel things crumbling and you can feel that uncertainty. And I feel that entheogenic practice along with meditation and yogic practice have made me very okay with uncertainty. But even with uncertainty, it's still nice for us to move towards wonderful things. So in this coming future, how do we think that medicines can be used to help to repair? Do we think that the populace is going to be more trusting now? There was such a movement towards moving towards psychedelics leading up to this. Do we think this is going to hold? Do you think people will continue to be trusting towards this movement, especially given how governments are handling things? Or do we think it may, who knows? Who wants to say something?
Well,
Yeah,
I do.
no,
Okay.
go for
There
it.
you
Go
go.
for it. You first. You first.
Well, we'll see, because I was speaking to my community members, the council members, and before about having introducing this to my community, because we had a mass trauma within the community, because I live in London and Grenfell Tower, and at the time, you know, I was laughed at, even though I had backing from Imperial College and the team there, but yeah, I was laughed at. So we'll see how people's opinions changed after this, and if they're more open to it, and depending on the levels of the trauma that has brought up in certain people, and looking for alternative help, because you know the help out there is not working.
I think you've got to make a distinction between, let's say, psychedelic, medical psychedelics and shamanism in the Western intake. Basically, I was speaking to some of the people who were running the phase 3 MDMA trials here in San Francisco for MAPS. That's ground to a halt. I mean, the trial, anything that is affected by quarantine is going to grind to a halt or be dethroned in a way and delayed. And I think that there's a growing danger within the medical psychedelic community globally that we're all starting to see, of the commodification of these substances to be a soma for the masses, to be something which they are, they do work, they are efficacious, they do have a pronounced ability to assist and help people heal from trauma and PTSD, and under, you know, the medical model with a therapeutic set and setting. And yet that model is also contained within the insurance medical system. It's like $6,000 for like 3 MDMA journeys with a therapist. You know, it's basically embedded within the capitalist model. And coronavirus is like that, when you drop a stone into a pond and then boom, and then the ripples continue to ripple. We've only hit the boom, and the ripples are coming. So capitalism, I read a lot of financial sites and just keep track of stuff. I mean, basically they're saying that the current, you know, global recession is twice as bad as the Great Depression currently, as we stand right now today, and it's yet to begin. I mean, the governments are pumping trillions of dollars to the top ends of the economy, which are the big businesses and the elites. And the everyday person is actually on the breadline. Their jobs are gone. They're all in quarantine. You know, most small businesses won't reopen because they don't have the savings. I mean, the ecosystem of the economy will adjust and adapt, and there's still going to be, you know, jobs and work out there. But capitalism as we know it is dead. We're still coasting. We don't understand it. We haven't seen it. Give it 3 months, because the fiscal band-aids of the governments of the world are just banding over the problem and delaying it for a few months. But there's going to be mass collapses of the financial system. So when we say things like medical psychedelics, which are all embedded within the system, and this is one of the criticisms that Gail Highbrook from Extinction Rebellion raised at Breaking Convention the last summer. She was like, look, they're all good and well. No one's saying that medical psychedelics aren't necessary, that they don't work. But when they're embedded within a capitalist system, they can only affect as much as you can afford it, right? And so what I'm saying now is that system is really not going to recover. And if the economy recovers to a certain degree, how many people are going to be able to afford this? I mean, you know, insurance companies are going to go broke. The medical establishment, everything is going down because it needs to. Because capitalism, it's a fucking cancer on the planet that has enslaved us for like 6,000 years. And it's like the psychedelics are ego dissolving. And, you know, capitalism is one response to how to navigate and survive on this planet. But if you look at indigenous cultures around the world, a tribal response, you know, almost like this horror, like Green New Deal, like socialism is like, imagine if everyone had healthcare. Imagine if everyone has not just employment, but purpose. Imagine if everyone has a roof over their head and is fed. And I'm not talking about a political institution giving us this. I'm talking about the sovereignty of people who know their own worth on this planet, rising up and making it happen. This is what we're facing in the years ahead. So when we're talking about medical psychedelics, yeah, they'll still be out there, but the whole projections of, return on investment, on everyone with their decks on how it's all going to go, it's all up for grabs. And that's just the medical psychedelics. I'll let someone else talk, and then I'd like to get back to the shamanism aspect, because I think that's where it's really going to come from, a community grassroots weaving of hearts and minds together to get these substances out to the world.
So I'd like to pick up there, if I may. One of the things that Natalie said that I agree with, what you mentioned, like the metaphor of the tower in Tarot, right? One of the problems that we're having is that the elites in this country are not letting the tower fall. They're feeding it trillions of dollars, like Rak said. And I mean, we're pretty much just have to wait for that money to run out. And it's a shame, because we could save a whole lot of money if they just let it fall already. As far as the medicalization of the question at hand, so we have right now, I mean, it's difficult because you have some in the medicine community who completely support the capitalist model of psychedelia and the medical approach. So I'm in Portland, Oregon, and right now there is an initiative called IP34 that is supposed, they say, legalize psilocybin in the state, but that's total bullshit. It's not legalizing psilocybin in the state. It's legalizing one family and one board of directors to use and have complete control of all psilocybin in the state. Now, because people like Paul Stamets, who is an investor in IP34, he's selling it to people as if, oh, this is a really good thing, but it does nothing to actually correct for the gross injustice of the war on drugs, especially against historically disenfranchised and marginalized people. It doesn't protect foragers. It doesn't protect everything we think about when we hear the word entheogen, that spiritual connection with these plant medicines and fungal allies. They're not protected at all. We also have guys like Michael Pollan, who I don't consider part of the medical or the medicine community at all. He's just a celebrity, and if this all goes belly up, he's just going to write another book that has nothing to do with psychedelics. But the problem is he is like pushing for this in my home state. He doesn't live here and he doesn't understand the ramifications. So I guess I'd almost like to volley this question back to you guys and maybe the listeners as well, if they could think, what do we do when those in our own medicine community, well, at least Paul Stamets is, are promoting the capitalist model? They want to still bring, after all this collapses, they're still hoping, like, they don't care if capitalism collapses everywhere else as long as there's still capitalism with plant medicines. Get the fuck out of here. Excuse me, but seriously.
Yes, it's funny. I was thinking about that the other day, because that was definitely a growing concern in the medicine community. Was a lot of money was all of a sudden coming very swiftly towards this stuff, and a lot of minds that don't have the best interests at heart. And like you were just saying, Rak, if this is all kind of crumbling a lot faster than people realize, maybe that could be a great benefit to the medicine community, as it would take that interest of high profit margins out of or off the table for those companies that were swooping in for the kill. So we'll see.
What it comes down to for me is these substances have the potential to heal, to illuminate, to reconnect. They don't do it all on their own. They do it in concert with you in the relationship you form with yourself and the journey. But the thing is, there's been a demand and a supply of entheogenic substances for as long as we've been human, right? I mean, that's not going to go away. And so in this time of planetary upheaval and transformation, I mean, this is the time. This is what we've been waiting for. And if people are stressed out, which we are, it's like reconnect, find your center. And you can do this in many ways. I've always said when I talk about psychedelics and earth medicines, that there's many paths that all lead to this central source, you know? It's like you can get there through meditation, you can get there through breath work or tantra, or, you know, Wim Hof, you know, other altered states. But as Terence McKenna used to say, do we have time for those pathways? I mean, maybe, and maybe they're also complementary to the medicine experience, but the planet secretes these substances and we have receptor sites that make them work. I mean, it's a match made in heaven on earth, right? We're meant to do this. And when we do this, it opens up a whole bandwidth of this spectrum of reality, which has been shut down by the egoic mind. The same egoic mind, which has separated itself from nature and built itself a cocoon, which we call culture. I mean, it's a cult. It's in the language. It's a cult that is like an algae bloom, been spreading for 10, 12,000 years, and we've forgotten that it's not the real thing. It's a separation from the fundamental reality of nature. And it's embedded within nature. And nature is knocking at our door. It's not stopping. The coronavirus is here. The financial collapse is here. And you know what I saw, this little thing that they're saying? Everyone's like, oh, look, the animals are coming back in the cities. And aren't the skies so clear over Los Angeles? It's wonderful. Nature's rebounding. Yeah, it's good. And you know what? It's like the global dimming, the smog and the metal particles in the upper atmosphere from all our pollution, which was rebounding the cosmic rays and the UV radiation, is now just streaming in, and it's getting hotter quicker, as it normally should be in this cycle. But global warming is increasing. The fires will be back this year for sure all around the world. The flooding will be back. The earthquakes are happening more and more. Mother Nature is transforming, and it's like we need to plug back in to her and to us, and we need to really quickly, in cultural time, make big changes for how we live on this earth. And one of the best ways to do that is to know yourself. And some of the best ways to do that is to have a relationship with earth medicines, whether they're made by nature or used in the right environment from a lab. But if you reduce the mind, if you reconnect to the planet and yourself, you can find center again, right? And you said right at the start, a lot of people, these challenging times, we can have challenging trips. That's the ego, and that's sorting through all the stuff we've got to work in, the shadow stuff. But if you sort it through, you become whole. You work on your stuff. And we need whole human beings to move forward into this next phase we're going through, to make the decisions. We can't be acting from fear. We can't be acting from holding on to what was. We've got to really ruthlessly let go of all our preconceptions. And this is what the psychedelic experience can assist in doing, of just totally stripping away everything that is not true and leaving you in the center of your being. And I think that's what we need.
Mm-hmm.
That's all great. My thing is how we're able to bring it to the masses. For example, bring it to your community, because everyone has these preconceived ideas and fears to do with psychedelics. So in terms of like the corporate world and the science-based world, for me, science and psychedelics come together perfectly. It's like a tree, like you have the spiritual aspect and you have the grounded aspect of the science. So I find that people are more open to listen to those kind of scientifical, coming from a scientific view. Yes, I love ceremony. I'm for ceremony, but when I realize about taking it back to my community, not a lot of the general community understands ceremony. It almost brings fear into them. So for me, it's finding a balance, you know, that you can, you know, to get the masses in. You're able to talk to the masses and they're able to understand you. You know, I find that that's the most important.
You know what? A doctor in a white lab coat is in his room with a patient, and that's a ceremony. It's just a word, right? It's a set and setting, and it's a container, and it's developing trust. So because 20th century world, medical world, everyone's indoctrinated with this idea that doctors know everything, that the healthcare system of the West is going to save us, you know, all this type of stuff. And that's true. I mean, you've got to work with what you've got in your communities, but also there's so much more. It's like, I mean, I mean, it can be, when we say the masses, again, it's like, previously, I think, you know, the scaling of psychedelics into the culture has all been done in the capitalist paradigm. And it's all about how we do it safely, I mean, so much energy, but how we avoid the Timothy Leary syndrome, you know? How can we get psychedelics back into the mainstream, to the masses, and scale it up so every therapist on every corner has access to these things? But the whole thing is embedded within capitalism still. So, you know, in the tribal world, the shaman or the medicine person, who is essentially the doctor of their community, would be in their community, and they would have a reciprocal energetic exchange where, yeah, they might have money, or maybe they give a chicken, or they give some type of food, or, you know, but the thing is, there is an exchange. So within their system, so the healing or the capacity of the person providing the medicine and working on behalf of the patient or the client has an exchange, a reciprocal exchange to continue their living. I think what we're going to see is more and more community-based systems which are using barter and swapping and some types of energy exchange, and it's going to re-tribalize. We're going to see the world in a because look at countries that have gone broke before. Look at Cuba, look at Argentina, you know, look at Russia during the collapse. It's like you grow food, you come back to basics, and you support each other, or you don't make it through, right? And it's like, so what my question is, how do medicine people who are carriers of these very powerful and sacred medicines, how do we engage with the community in a way which maybe isn't about money? If none of us have money, how do we move forward and support each other doing what we do?
That's a great question. I'd like to jump in right there. You do that by supporting decriminalization movements, not legalization movements. I cannot stress this enough. Too often I'm hearing, especially on social media, people tend to think that decriminalization is like a step towards legalization, or legalization is a step towards decriminalization. That is just not true at all. If you do care about what Rak's talking about, which I know the four of us do, and I'm sure many of the people watching right now do too, and you want there to be medicine for the people in the hands of responsible practitioners, maybe they don't have PhDs, but I don't, the facilitators that I've gone to, none of them have ever had PhDs, and they were all fantastic. And we know that there was last year, I believe, in the summer of 2019, there were some MAPS doctors right up in Canada that got in trouble, right, for being inappropriate with a patient or something like that. So yeah, so that certificate doesn't actually matter. What matters, in my opinion, I'm a Donatist on the issue, meaning that I believe that the only thing that actually matters is the cleanliness of the soul of the facilitator. That's it. How much do they really, how much of a connection do they have to this medicine? How much are they trying to create a container for you to connect to this medicine? And I would respectfully disagree, Rak, that I think there is a big difference between a person in a lab in a white coat giving, you know, some kind of, you know, psilocybin product, for lack of a better way of putting it, and the kinds of ceremonies that I'm sure the four of us are all familiar with. Especially, you know, when you look at some of the literature from the 1950s, you had Sanderson over at Poway Hospital, where they were creating, you know, really the first ideal setting for psychedelic psychotherapy. And then you read about places in America where they're just these drab, like, dungeons where people are having the worst experiences ever. So a person in a white lab coat in a clinic could absolutely potentially set up a ceremony, but I don't know, I guess for me it almost, being a little too liberal with that idea, for me anyway, just my opinion, almost cheapens it. And I think that there are, at least from my practices, there are different gateways and different keys that with the right ceremony and symbolism and setting and all the stuff that we all know all about, that you can achieve different areas of the other world. I mean, I don't always go to the same place. I can set where I'm going to end up, like with my experiences. And I know some people say, oh, how can you do that? Well, I mean, just check out the altar, you know, like I have a lot of techniques that I use to get myself to that place. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I agree. Just to clarify, it's more is what you said. It's like a matter of empathy. It's like whether you call yourself a doctor or a facilitator or a provider or a medicine person or a shaman, it's really about the ego and the ability to drop that or put that ego into service of the person you're serving or being in service to. And so my question, just to reiterate though, is if capitalism is going down, which it is, and it's limp along and it's going to try to, you know, survive in some stunted form, but there's this groundswell within the community, like everyone's hurting, and it's not just Corona. Everyone's been hurting for a very long time. Everyone's been, you know, suppressed and held back. And, you know, Charles Eisenstein has his book and this beautiful phrase of like another world that we know in our hearts is possible, right? And what we're seeing now is a collapse of the story, the paradigm. It creates a freedom of possibility that something more could come from this. And so the question is, how can psychedelics and entheogens, plant medicines, earth medicines, how can these substances be utilized as catalysts in this time when we're figuring out not just how to cope, how to get rid of the stress and the PTSD of everything that's come before and of the times? How can they help us find ourselves? And how can they help us guide ourselves or create some type of cultural consensus on what type of world do we want? You know, that's the big question, I think. You know, how do we use these substances in this time and in the times ahead?
I think it's to start with just your everyday people in your community. If you start with one community member that maybe wasn't open to it and didn't know so much about it, you start with one person that will spread to other people that don't necessarily know about it. For me, it's about the people that wouldn't necessarily go into it and they see it and they're scared of it. But it's breaking down that fear with just that one person and just letting the ripple go out to the rest of your near community.
Well, you know, Tom mentioned Michael Pollan before, and yeah, I agree with you. And he's done a great service, though, in some respects, because so many people I meet, the parents and the older generation and the Michael Pollan fans, New York Times bestselling writer, they all have heard about the positive benefits of psychedelics, and they're all interested. They're not so many say they want to try, but the cultural seedbed for the last 15 years or so has all been about psychedelic renaissance. And people are open to the ideas of these substances now. The question is, can the community seize the day and take that goodwill that's there for the possibility of psychedelics and just do what needs to be done? And the question is, how do we do that? And what is it that needs to be done? I mean, I'm not saying, again, this Tim Leary thing of like put acid in the water supply or that everyone needs to do these substances, but there is something very empowering, healing, and it feels like, you know, it's time to tap into the deeper potentials that we have, and these substances have been proven to be able to do that.
Sure, and let me say that I am first of all, I'm a fan of Michael Pollan's earlier work, and I am absolutely happy with the way he has popularized psychedelics in a positive way. There's no doubt about that. I suppose my gripe would be him confusing himself for an expert, which he is not. He put out an article, I think it was 2 summers ago, that said that, you know, should we even start thinking about psilocybin therapy? Like, we're not ready to have that conversation. It's like, no, Mr. Pollan, you're not ready to have that conversation. I'm sitting here with 3 other people that could absolutely have that conversation. So you know, kudos to him for doing that. But because of his position, and I just want to get this out, because he is so popular, he has to be like very careful with the statements he makes, in my opinion. It's just like, you know, he has such a huge platform, and that's great. And again, all power to the fact that he's showing psychedelics in a positive light. I couldn't thank him enough for that. I really can't. But he does have to be a little bit more careful. And just because he's getting invited on talk shows to not, you know, not know enough about psychedelics to not know that he's not an expert in that field, if that makes sense.
Well, you know what he's doing as well? It's this push and pull, like the engine of the culture has like acceleration and brakes, right? And it's like the authorities, the establishment often put the brakes on things, and they try to slow things down, and they're titrating psychedelics coming back in. And it's okay if it's done in a certain setting with a doctor here and here. They don't want another revolution. They don't want another 60s, right? And no one actually is saying we want another 60s. I want a 20s. I want something new. And I'm not, again, saying I don't think to even focus on the Timothy Leary, but you know, there's this in spiritual circles, there's this saying in, I think it's Buddhism, that who is that? Sorry, that was me. In spiritual circles, there's this saying that, you know, the next Buddha will be a collective. That the next Buddha is, it's not about one person having these spiritual experiences and then going out and trying to convince the world about it, you know, in spreading it. It's not about the ego identification of any one person. It's about the community. It's about the collective. It's about the whole. And I think that that's what we've got to put the focus on. How do we nurture our communities, and how do we take the focus away from the doctor or the facilitator or the shaman? How do we all remember? How do we hold space for each other? And if we look at certain communities like Santa Daime, which have been involved with ayahuasca for generations now, that's very much a community endeavor. You know, they all prepare the medicine together. They all work with the medicine together. It's not about paying someone to provide you medicine. It is a church, and there's dogmas and there's other things. But the thing is, this idea of collectivism, how can we support the medicines of the planetary intelligence getting out to the people, you know, in a collective way, which is maybe not about money? And I think there's a lot of rich opportunity there.
You know, I think it's going to happen a few different ways, but it's funny, you know, speaking of Michael Pollan and other people who kind of really get out there with a loud name but don't really carry the spirit of the entheogenic community, there can be such a tendency of us to have a lot of problem with that. But I always have to reflect on my own journey, my own kind of how I got into yoga. You know, the first type of yoga I started doing around 15 years ago was Bikram yoga. And if you're not familiar with Bikram yoga, check the Netflix documentary about him and his warrants out for his arrest for sexual assault and all that madness. But Bikram yoga is essentially the farthest from yoga that one can get. It has nothing to do with yoga or the 8 limbs. It is just a physical practice. And he went hardcore kind of guru role, yells insane things at his students, bangs half of his students, just a proper dirtbag. But, you know, so then, you know, there was this whole phase once I started really, you know, getting into the deeper practices of yoga. Then I went through my own phase where, you know, people would say, oh yeah, I love Bikram yoga. If they said, you know, do you like Bikram yoga? They would automatically get at least a 30-minute lecture from me about why Bikram yoga is not yoga. And then at some point I had to realize though, but it got me here, that sometimes it takes something watered down to get people into something, to open certain people up who wouldn't normally be open to that. Like you said, Natalie, how people wouldn't normally receive it well if it's presented a certain way. Michael Pollan opened it up for a lot of people who normally wouldn't listen to what the rest of us weirdos are saying. And, you know, of course, there's going to be a bunch of people going just on what he said, but with that, there's going to be at least a few, more than a few. I'm sure all of us have talked to at least a few who have come from his book, you know, that got the juice of it, you know, that heard the call, and maybe they tried it back in the day and returned to it, or they wanted to try it, and so they went and they found something very special, and then it gives them a chance to deepen their practice. And so in the meantime, while other things like that spread out to the masses, this downtime that we have, those of us who are serious into our entheogenic practice and our and have love for the culture, we get to go in and we get to work on ourselves and get to see what kind of world we want to shape, what kind of entheogenic community we want to be a part of. And in my opinion, every dynasty, every kingdom, every community, every religion, every relationship has spawned out of a person's subconscious mapping and their own personality. You know, it's always had to do with their fears, their loves, their desires. And if we can filter out enough of our stuff to where we can put something together as a group that is less, I can't say that is not tainted, because it's always going to have our usness in it, but something that is less tainted by greed, less tainted by drives, even if we're not aware of those drives, because a lot of times we have subconscious drives that are coming from early childhood wounds or unresolved issues from our past that we're not even aware of how they're echoing out into our, into our behavior or into our relations. So I think it gives us this chance now, this downtime, to work on ourselves in a lot of ways, but to see how we want to put it back together. I keep going back to this, experience, like just after coming out of a 5-MeO session, the state of neuroplasticity, just the state of, okay, we got to go in there and just crumble a bunch of stuff away. What do we want to do with it now? What do we want to do now? And I think how we get it to the masses is going to be many different ways. I think, as we said, some of the masses are going to be, are going to come from mediums like Michael Pollan and, different areas that do not carry quite the substance, but hopefully can lead people to the depth. And it's going to be up to people like us and people in the community to really work on themselves so we can be good ambassadors and messengers for the medicine. So we can not just talk about the medicine and why the medicine works, but as we can use ourselves as examples, as we can be lighthouses or work ourselves to be beacons of light, so people can notice that there is a difference about us. Notice that there is a difference about the way we handle our situations or the way we communicate with others, and they will naturally gravitate towards that and want to know more. And we can just hope for that.
Sure. Just to reiterate real quick, I like Michael Pollan. I just want him to be a little bit more careful with the statements that he makes publicly. That's all. And I couldn't be happier that he's brought so many people. Look, just from my own perspective, like I saw a spike in book sales of my own book after Michael Pollan's book came out. So I don't, I'm not against him at all. I just want him to be a little bit more careful. And not just him, anybody that's in the public eye that hasn't worked with medicine, let's say the way Rak has worked with medicine. I'm more interested in what Rak has to say when it comes to those deeper truths, not, somebody like a Michael Pollan with saying that with great respect for him.
I fully agree with you, by the way. We're on the same page.
So I'd like to bring up the other side of the equation. We've talked about, I think there is like a difference in paradigms between the psychedelic community and the shamanic community. They're not just interchangeable terms. Psychedelics usually means, mind opening or mind manifesting, and entheogens is like revealing the divine within. But traditionally, the difference is the planetary medicines that are secreted by the earth, including the fungi and the toads and the plants, which can alter consciousness, which have this Gaian relationship. We talked about Gaia at the start. And so even though we've seen 15 years or more of the psychedelic renaissance in a cultural level, trying to bring psychedelics back into the medical fold, there's been at least 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 generations in the West. You could go all the way back to William Burroughs in the 50s when he went to Peru and tried yahe for the first time, the ayahuasca brew. Of the planetary medicines coming out to the world. And both these things, the psychedelics coming into the culture and the entheogens coming out from nature, are part of a larger, I guess you could call you could use what Terence said, the archaic revival, a paradigm shift, where the old and the new and all the worlds are all coming together again. And this is the time when we're between worlds, where this potential is even stronger now, and fresh pathways can be developed. But essentially, there's been at least 2 generations of shamanism in the West, learning from indigenous cultures and their legacies, training with them, adapting the medicines to the way that Westerners work in the West. There's pros and cons, and there's been a lot of teething issues, but this has happened completely outside, more or less, of the medical model. And we don't know the statistics, but I would hazard a guess it's like 100 times bigger than the medical model around the world. And it's not going to stop. I mean, it's not going to stop because, as we said at the start, humans have always engaged with the Earth's substances to change their consciousness, whether you call that food or whether you call that drugs, right? I mean, we're in something bigger. And really, I think we're mature enough as a global species to face what these medicines are showing us, both within ourselves and how our mind works, and the default mode network and the unconscious mind and all the compartmentalized energies we have, and that there's something bigger. The consciousness is not local, it's non-local, it's broadcast, and it's emanating from everywhere where the center is, right? That there is a source consciousness emanating, and that we are embedded in a larger organism that we could call Gaia, or we could call Earth, or the solar system, but it's fucking infinite and beautiful, and it wants us to be in relationship with it, and we're ready. I mean, as a global species, humanities, the whole 60s was like the teenage angst, and now we're sort of coming into our 20s, right? And it's like, oh, well, who do we want to be? Where do we want to live? How are we going to do it? But I think we have this great opportunity where there's millions of people who've experienced plant medicines. Not everyone stays on the path, but to a large degree, a lot of people stay in community, in plant and earth-based medicine communities. And they might only gather together every once in a while to sit together to do medicine in a ceremony, but they have this sense of community even outside that ceremony. There was one study done, I think, with Dennis McKenna in the 90s, the Ayahuasca Project, and it looked at the communities that were with the Yahe or the ayahuasca, and how it helped reinforce their connection to each other after the medicine had wore off, and how they would come together, and their community in the Santo Daime communities would have a common bond and a common experience together, and how that helped support them in the hard times. I mean, the thing is, so many Westerners for 2-3 generations have tried to recreate this sense of community of what indigenous tribal peoples have, and failed, because they try to do it and they try to juggle their work and they try to juggle all their disconnection and all their disparateness, and everyone's on different levels. But these medicines bring us together. They bring us the great equalizer. Everyone is one in your medicine ceremony and as you go through this journey together. And if a community has a central driving, unifying vision and experience, that's what makes them a community. And that's what gets you through hard times, is a community, right? A common unity. So I think there is an incredibly valuable and necessary role for the earth medicines in the planet at the moment, and not just to spread it to the masses, but to keep cohesive our existing medicine communities, to keep praying, to keep loving, to keep sharing, and to keep looking out for each other, and to keep bringing new people in as we can. But we just need to keep that cohesion and keep the ceremonies going to hold it together, so that we can continue to have a safe space as things really fall apart.
Oh shit. Well, does anyone have anything to add on to that?
Yes, but if I did, I would go for another half hour. So I'm going to do everybody a favor and just forego and say that, once again, Rak has racked it up nicely. And yeah, well done. This was fun.
I just want to add on that.
The boy behind this was just trapping Rak in here and getting him to talk for a while.
I just wanted to add, I mean, there are existing global infrastructure for the plant medicine and psychedelic communities. We've had, in the last decade, we've had so many, not just not-for-profits, but meetup groups and integration groups And all around the world, there's psychedelic societies now, and we have these nodal points of recognition of where the others are. Like, you know, the old Tim Leary thing, find the others. We found the others. Now what are we going to do, right? So imagine, without breaking any laws in your country where things may be illegal, imagine if, you know, you just get your integration group together one Sunday and you all go out to the woods together and you do nothing but do what you do together in the woods together. And, you know, so much of Western culture's appropriation of these states is about optimization and even like getting over your PTSD and healing, and it's doing, and it's like, it's got agendas and it's got goals, and it's like it's like a 12-step program for psychedelic enlightenment. And yeah, that might work and that's good for some people. But what I'm saying is, at the basic thing we can do, at the base of everything, is we can commune with each other. And we can do it safely, and we can have trip sitters, and we can have a good set and setting, and we can get out to nature. I mean, at the moment, it's freaking almost against the law to go back to nature, right? Because we're all in quarantine. So it's like, yet again, this medicine community is like, we are sovereign beings, and there is a greater law that's out there. You know, it's the law of the divine source. And anything which can bring us closer to that can help us get through these troubled times. So I just encourage all the psychedelic societies, all the integration groups, all the meetups to actually come together. I mean, if you do it in your building or if you get out to nature, but take that next step, you know, do it together, do it with support, do it with a certain setting that's going to be conducive. But the infrastructure is all there. It's just conjugating the verb. It's going to the next level with it as a community.
Yeah, I just want to say really quick off of that, I absolutely do encourage the use of illegal psychedelics. I encourage the breaking of any and all unjust laws, 100%. If your government is telling you not to do something, you know, they don't know what they're talking about most of the time, especially when it comes to things like psychedelics. Getting back to earlier when Natalie had brought up with this introduction and how do we, you know, bring people into this, I think that there's a word that we've been brought up a few times over this conversation, but we haven't really appreciated that it exists, and that word is integration. All of us who have been using these medicines and working with them for at least a decade. I mean, nobody was saying the word integration 10 years ago. There was when I was first eating mushrooms, the concepts of self-love and integration, that was not at all. Nobody used words like that. But it's a good thing that we are now, because integration is as important as the medicine itself, because it's literally how you bring those lessons into your life. So it's really that important. And also, I don't know, I think that the stories that we create around our practices help to convey purpose for other people. And I know that I'm not saying that very well. I'm just saying that earlier, I think it was Joël who brought up, or Rak, it was one of you, that you know, people need purpose. I believe that underlying this whole coronavirus thing, even if the coronavirus weren't here, we are suffering from a crisis of purpose in this country. We were realizing, some of us already knew, but the people, there's this grand awakening. They're like, you know, a 50-inch flat screen TV actually isn't making me happy. I liked it when I first got it. It was exciting to get out of the box, but that faded. Oh, and that car and that this and that, all these things, we're learning that capitalist goods are not the road to happiness. And so we're going to be searching for, now that capitalism is going to be falling apart right in front of our faces and all around us, that's going to actually give people breathing room to find purpose, which is far more important than any television or any material good, in my opinion.
I'm with you with the integration, because as much as we can go to the kind of psychedelic communities, but it's our home communities that need it the most, that need the education the most about these kind of things, because they're stuck in these stories that have been told, stuck lost in the book, and it's them that needs to get reprogrammed again, for me, is I found on my journey is we can travel so high, but is to be able to be grounded just like a tree and rooted, so we can bring everything that we've learned from our travels to go back and to explain it in a very rooted, earthly way that everybody can understand.
Well put, Natalie. Well put.
Uh-huh.
Aho.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm looking forward to seeing, speaking of communities, is what kind of communities pop up after this. When people are allowed to get together again, what sort of communities spring up? What sort of creations are birthed? What sort of new ideas come to life? You know, my brother and I were just starting a big project in Tepoztlan in Mexico just before all this happened, and it's going to be very interesting to see where kind of how this alters it, because I really feel it being some kind of haven for community. So we'll see how we can take the old commune model and rejuge it up a little bit. Who knows? But yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. How about you guys?
I'm good. This was so much fun, and I hope you keep doing this with all kinds of medicine workers all over the world, because this was fantastic, man. Thank you for putting it together. And Rak and Natalie, thank you guys so much for participating. It was Rak, it's always a pleasure when we get to speak. Natalie, it was an absolute privilege and joy to meet you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'd just throw in there, Joel, that if you're going to continue this, this has been great. And I think for me, feeling into some of the subjects we discussed today, without having necessarily any answers, the questions are what's valuable. And so I would continue to canvass the medicine community for what their vision is for these times and the times that we're going to create, or the times that are creating us, for how we can be of greatest service, for how the medicines and the people who are caretakers of the medicines can best serve humanity in these times. I mean, these are great questions, and let's see what happens.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Aho.
Oh.
I just wanted to say also, I chose this special screensaver because I unfortunately don't know who the artist is, but it's this beautiful art I got on Facebook of this indigenous communities and this web of life of like drinking from the water and the ground and circulating up through the body. And, you know, there's this whole retribalization that's happening, and even here on Zoom. So, you know, Zoom is wonderful because it connects us together and it can be a cornerstone of our virtual communities. And I'm very happy that we've had this time today. Many blessings.
Could I add one thing real quick? Sorry, just I know that we're more on the questions than the answers, but one thing that Eden and I, Eden's my partner at Sanctum Psychedelia, we started our garden, and we have certain friends that are going to be growing certain things that we're not. We're growing certain things that these other people, and then we're just sharing it all. It's just like, hey, we've got the carrots and the tomatoes, you got the potatoes and the squash, you got the pumpkins and the cannabis, or, you know, whatever. And that's a really good thing that I would encourage anybody watching this, if you have some friends in your area, that you each just start your own gardens and you each grow something different, and just not even just sharing with each other, because that needs to be the reality we create for the future. Not greed, sharing.
Tom, maybe you've hit on something. Maybe psychedelic swap meets are the way of the future. And someone brings the cannabis and someone brings the 5-MeO and the mushrooms and the ayahuasca. I'm not suggesting you all do that or you do it at the same time, but you take money out of the equation, you know, and a swap meet.
I didn't want to incriminate myself, but yeah, we're on that one too, Rak.
This
Awesome.
is how we live in this is how we live in Jamaica, actually, with the community. Someone would come, you know, and they'll bring their plant in, and then another one would bring their yam, and they would exchange within themselves within the community.
I think that to not be joking about it, I think that's a viable model moving forward as capitalism collapses. It's like just, you know, open doors. Everyone brings something, everyone shares. But just try the model out of community-based ceremonies and see how it can support each other.
Absolutely. All right. That's right, Natalie. I forgot you're Jamaican too. I'm West Indian myself, and I used to work in Jamaica. Family, family. Oh, good, good, good. Well, guys, it was a pleasure. It was nice to be able to talk to some people who aren't in my house. Lots of love, lots of love. And yeah, let's do this again soon. Rak, I really like your idea. I'm going to start reaching out to more people and kind of, I think I've got a good kind of running theme and with good questions to raise.
Beautiful. All right. Many blessings, my friends.
All right. Lots of love, guys.
Blessings to you all.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.